Welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. We're diving deep into the intricate layers of the 7-stage generational wealth model to offer invaluable insights on legacy building, wealth accumulation and preservation, and financial growth across generations. I'm Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and this is the New Wealth Wave podcast. Hey, future wealth builders, welcome to another episode of the New Wealth Wave podcast, where generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. I'm your host, Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and today we are taking a journey through all 7 stages of my 7-stage generational wealth model, which focuses on the past, present, and the future of your financial journey. Guiding us through this powerful conversation is James Alexander, CFP Partner at Edge Financial. This is his 3rd time in the studio as well. He is a friend of the program. Glad to have him back. Started off the year in 2025 with him, came back in the second quarter. Now we're going to end the year with him as well. If you're new to the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you stay connected to these game-changing conversations. And if you haven't already, pick up my latest book, Amazon bestseller, Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge. It is on Amazon, and again, it is a bestseller. So, James, welcome back into the studio. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thanks so much for having me on again. I am doing especially well because we were just talking, my Chicago Cubbies are officially in the playoffs, even though they're limping along. We made it, and it's been a while, so I couldn't be better.
You know, this is the best time in regards to baseball, the end of the year, September, October. You have football getting into play, going into the first quarter. You have baseball getting into the playoffs, and then around the corner, you have the NBA, you have college basketball, and also you have the WNBA. So it's a lot of things happening so far in the sports world. So let's get into the podcast itself. It's built on my 7-stage generational wealth model, which focuses on the past, present, and the future. So stage 1, we focus on our internal and external ecosystem, walls in and walls out, which creates our inherited financial narratives and encoded financial behaviors. Stage 2, we delve into our financial genetic code, targeting both our financial trauma and anxieties. Stage 3, it's all about financial healing, reprogramming our financial genetic code, which is a byproduct of stages 1 and 2. Stage 4, financial edification. Here we focus on financial literacy and inclusion. Stage 5, financial well-being. This is our soft landing where financial health equals financial wealth. Stage 6, generational knowledge, which leads us into creating our financial footprints, leading us into stage 7, generational wealth. Now, you can go to episodes 28 and 34 as we touch on his fun facts and we ask the 3 prevalent questions that we always ask. So we're not going to go into that today, but if you want to know a little bit more about Mr. Alexander, tap into episodes 28 and 34 and you can hear all about Mr. Alexander. So we're going to get right into the podcast itself. James, you had a chance to read the book. Which part of the book resonated most with you and your practice today?
Yes. So I read it in about 4 days, by the way. Testament to your writing and all the deep thought you put into it. The thing that probably most resonated to me within what I do for a living, which is helping people win with money and be at peace with money, is how many times you've highlighted with examples, each person is wired differently on how they think about money based on their past. And we have to understand that past first in order to move forward. And you've highlighted it so well, not just in the 7-stage model, but in the book. And I couldn't agree more with that because I cater a lot of my advice to my clients based on what I believe them to be wired. And a takeaway I had was I need to dig into that a little bit more sometimes because there's a lot to unpack with each of us into how we think about money, how we grew up with money, our perceptions, etc. So that piece I don't think is talked about enough in society. We just have these rule books that we're supposed to have, but we got to understand us first before we get there.
You know, I had a chance to talk to a lot of financial planners such as yourself. And one area that they mentioned that they were able to take away from the book was the self-discovery of themselves. I firmly believe that we as financial planners oftentimes shift our financial genetic code to our clients unbeknownst to us. We transfer that to them and really not understanding who we are. And many of the planners, again, who's in the field have read the book, said it allowed them to do a self-inventory on themselves to better understand their clients. Now I understand what may be rational to them, may be irrational to me, but I have to understand their inherited financial narratives, their encoded financial behaviors. So we talked about the term, the financial genetic code, as you can see the shirt here. So which of these ideas did you find most eye-opening in terms of your client conversations?
I think the biggest one is how much you emphasize the fact that you can, in fact, rewrite your past to a better future. It's very easy for us to say, well, this is how it is, so I'm going to play that game of a victim mentality. And you challenge that in the book incredibly hard. And I respect that and I applaud that, because too many of us feel this, well, this is how it's just supposed to be. And that this is my genetic code and I can't change it. But through the appropriate behaviors and following these steps, it can be done. And I've seen it firsthand with clients who had fears of certain things based on their past, and we're working through it. They've overcome it. So I think, again, that's a very, very powerful thing, is don't accept normalcy as the reality of your life forever. Or don't accept, poverty if you're in that stage, or, all these beliefs that you have. Don't just accept that that's always what it's going to be. If you don't like it, you can do something about it. And it's also not as hard as it may seem.
When you talk about the inherited financial narratives and the encoded financial behaviors, there's tons of stories. I've used several examples, but is there any specific example that you was able to kind of resonate with a client that you've had in the past or currently meeting with today?
Yeah, great question. Great follow-up. So the biggest common one, and I can think of one specific client recently, is the idea around debt. They thought debt is always a bad thing. Nobody should ever be in debt. And if I have it, that means I'm doing something wrong. And we need to unpack that a little bit more. In reality, they had the mindset that money was scarce. And when money is scarce, we focus on cost, not value. And so we had to talk through what's good debt, what's bad debt, how to use debt to our advantage and not take on too much risk, but use it enough to be able to grow the way we want to grow, and all of that. And so there are people who I do tell, based on their financial behaviors, you should get in fully out of debt, even with your mortgage. And there are other people that I actually believe should use debt in a good way. And so I'll probably conclude by stating this, which again, I think your book highlights so well the alternative. But if you're listening to a social media sentiment or TikTok or whatever the case may be on the TV, and there is a be all end all statement, you have to do this, and if you don't, you won't be successful, run away. Because everyone's wired differently, as you've highlighted. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. You just need to think through it and what matters to you and what you're going after.
So how does this book bridge a gap you often see in traditional financial literacy books that are out there on the market today?
So traditional financial literacy, it's more of a playbook that's monetary based. You should save X, you should invest this way. It's almost like you're supposed to live a financial straight line. And if we think back to the 50s and the 60s, even prior to that, life was a lot more linear financially. Life is not that way anymore. Getting a pension is incredibly rare. People retired in their 60s and they passed away when they were 80. So retirement was very different. Inflationary components were very different. Cost of homes were different. I mean, I can go on, right? The access to information now and having us confused is so different. Traditional finance says follow the math and go ahead and do that. And the way you're approaching it is attitudes, behaviors, mindsets is probably the best way to put it, is the starting point to be able to execute that math for what matters to you. And I think that piece is something that we ignore as a human being because we just want the easy answers to the test. I want to get better with money. How do I do that? Give me 3 things and I'll be good. It's not that simple. That's what I think your book highlights differently than others, is this isn't just about a math equation. 80% of it is execution and behavior. 20% is the math.
Appreciate that. So you mentioned that you had a few of your clients that actually have purchased the book. What would you say to them in regards to why you should pick up the book and read it?
I do a monthly video for my clients, and I talk about what's going on in the markets and some financial planning tips. And my latest tip was I read this book that I found was phenomenal. And the way I talked about it was something that I had mentioned earlier, which is this isn't a how to win with money day one and follow a formula and all of that. This is to better get to know yourself and what makes you think about money in certain ways based on your past, and how to be truthful with yourself through questions that you've asked in the book. And that's the foundational piece to this. And so if those of you are interested in getting better with your money mindset, read this book. A couple people reached out to me and they said, I want a copy. And I'll share one thing that a client shared with me after he read the book. He read it in full. And I was pretty blown away by this. I was not expecting this response, Dr. Wallace, but he said, we need to talk about some insurance for me right now. And that was an amazing takeaway. You did the homework for me. I've been on him for that for a while, but all of a sudden now he wants this because that book opened his eyes. So there's so many pieces to this. And when you read the book, you don't have to read it in 4 days like I did, but really spend some time with it. I think you'll thank yourself.
Thank you for that as well. When I wrote the book, it was directed towards two markets. One was the 5 financial professionals and the regular person, the thousandaire, the millionaire, the billionaire, the nowhere, the hundredaire, right? All these individuals. But most importantly, I really felt that in regards to the 5 professionals, the financial educator, the therapist, the counselor, the planner, and advisor, I really believe that it's important for each of us to understand why we're in the business to take on more of a servant leadership. And oftentimes and not, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of material that are out there that's telling you to do this, buy this, make this happen, and using financial literacy. And then financial literacy can be financial shaming as well. And using the term generational wealth. With generational wealth, I believe, begins with generational knowledge. But we both know that you and I, and everyone else is really focused on stage 5, which is financial well-being. We are trying to get to a point where we have financial health. Because if we don't have, in regards to financial health in stage 5, well, stage 6 is virtually impossible because we don't have any assets to really transfer. And the question is always, is it more important to have generational knowledge or have the assets? And I firmly believe that the knowledge is so important because it allows us to transfer our assets successfully. And as you know, estate planning, irrevocable trust, revocable trust, life insurance, long-term care, all of these are so important. So as your client mentioned, he's probably heard the importance of having life insurance, but putting it in a format in the book suggests that, especially when you have to go through the self-assessments, the question is, do you have life insurance? Yes or no? And you say, well, I don't have any life insurance. I may need to get that because I never thought of it. I never looked through that lens before. So thank you for that. But it was specifically to help all the 5 financial professionals be in a better position with their clients. Because again, I've done all the work pretty much. I've given you answers to the tests. Now it's an opportunity for them to go through and read it, take the self-assessments, as you mentioned earlier. And then when they meet with someone like yourself, they can ask those educated questions that allow you to be able to put a plan in place to reach their goals and objectives.
Yes. One of the pieces we talked about is he fully admitted when we talked about insurance in the past, he focused on cost. If I have to do this, it's going to cost this per month. I'd rather use that money for certain things, not realizing, to your point, the value that it's giving those in the off chance something A were to happen to him, B, he needed care, all the above. And so that's a big takeaway that I think you don't directly talk about, but you indirectly highlight. It's not about cost, it's about value. And when you're building wealth, you need to focus on the value.
James, what I find powerful about your perspective as a CFP is how it connects directly to what I wrote about in Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge, because one of the central truths about the book is that you can't build what you can't heal. And I mentioned earlier, you mentioned to me last time that you were really going to start pursuing the behavioral therapy in regards to behavioral finance, because that helped me become more well-rounded in this field of financial planning, because I was able to look at it from a different perspective as before. Then writing the book obviously helped that as well. I firmly believe that's where the 7-stage generational model comes into play, especially stages 3 and 4, financial healing, financial edification. It's so important to understand the importance of financial edification in regards to inclusion. Yes, we can talk about literacy. And as you mentioned earlier, your client earlier, probably well-versed in terms of literacy. But the inclusion piece, that's the piece where we're missing. Why are we not participating in that? Why do we not have a long-term care? Why do we not have life insurance? As you mentioned earlier, the cost, they're looking at it from a very transactional phase versus the worth of it all, which is so important. Let's get into today's market. As we've seen in the news, whatnot, the Fed's rate adjustments are front page news. How do the book lessons, especially around behavior and mindset, help clients process these changes?
I'll start with a lot of the news headlines that comes up, market conditions. In the past, we've talked about the fact that there's always going to be something to be concerned about with the market. There's never not been. If we reflect back over the years, there's always something that people get concerned about. However, when we focus on ourselves and what we are striving for, how to understand ourselves individually and what we think, it's a lot easier to first tune out the outside factors because we need to focus on us first. And then after we understand how we're hardwired, educating ourselves, what's good, what's bad, what's in between, what do I care about, all the above, then we can look at the market landscape and apply some of those pieces and use some of those pieces within the market environment to benefit us. And too many times people have it reversed. They say, the market's too high, I don't want to do XYZ. That's outside in first instead of inside out. And so I think that's, again, what the book highlights is let's understand us and then look at everything else.
One of the things I highlighted in the book, I think it's on page 84, 85, I tabled 20 essential inherited financial narratives. You have the narrative itself, the definition, and at the end, you have the behavioral aspect, and then you have the self-talk, the healing aspect of it all. And oftentimes, and not, one that many people always bring up to me, the scar tissue narrative, which is so important because it's one of those type of narratives that is built in based on something that may have happened prior. And it may have been a situation, they may have watched their family go through something, so to speak, 2008. We can use that as an example. For that reason, they look at it from their parents' point of view. Now they're older and they say, well, I'm not going to participate in the market simply because I watched my parents. And you have to self-talk, you have to self-correct to be able to make the decision, as you mentioned, that's best for you, understanding who you are, understand that you're not like your parents, or you're not in that situation before because things have changed. But as we do know, people who did stay in the market during that time was very successful, right? So we have the recency bias, we have those type of things that come into place, herd mentality, if you will. So now we see that the interest rates have fallen. So what does that mean to the end user, so to speak, from your perspective?
Net for the personal finance individual, it's a good thing for you. So those that may have purchased homes in the last couple of years, as interest rates continue to drop, it gives you the opportunity to refinance your mortgage or refinance other debts at a lower interest rate, lowering that monthly cost. That gives you some money back. Furthermore, if you look at statistics in the market, over a long period of time, ignoring all the short-term fluctuations over a long period of time, during falling interest rate environments from the Fed, the stock market likes that. Why does it like it? It's cheaper for us to borrow. It's also cheaper for massive publicly traded companies to borrow, even small publicly traded companies to borrow. When I have cheaper debt, I can grow faster. And so the market generally likes that, so we should applaud that. The only negative piece, and this is something for all of us individually to think about, is if we have cash and money markets, cash and CDs, things of that nature, if the CDs come due or the money markets that are ever changing rates, those will drop. And so we want to make sure that we're making best use of that money. If we hold assets in fixed income, we make best use as we move forward. And so that'll be certainly another discussion point for those interested, but it changes the narrative slightly. It should not change the long-term aspect, but many ways it'll help us, this falling rate environment.
I totally agree with that. So how do you calm financial anxiety during these cycles?
I always use stories. Stories typically resonate more than facts. And so I'd like to use the herd approach in a different positive way. So yes, you're concerned about XYZ. I had a client who was also concerned about these same factors 3 years ago. And I explained what we talked through, how they acted upon it, and where they are now based on overcoming that fear. The reason I do that is, to me, it accomplishes one of two things. One, you're not alone. We often, when we're reading things, we think, oh gosh, am I the only one concerned about this? I need to talk to other people about it. Is this okay? Right? It spirals. And when emotions hit, it clouds logic. So we need to understand we're not alone. And then number two is there's a path out of here when concerns happen. There's always going to be a path. And I actually have a chart that I'll use for some people to calm concerns around. Look at all these major negative news headlines that have happened over the last 20 years and look at the performance of the markets over that last 20 years. If you just look at any individual year in a vacuum, you're going to think the sky is falling. But when we zoom out, it's overcame a lot. And those that say this time is different, I get it, right? It's so easy to say the uncertain future versus the past. But if this time is truly different and we have Armageddon, there's nowhere to hide. There's no action that can take. Keeping cash isn't going to work either, because it's not going to be worth anything if the Armageddon happens. And so we just have to eliminate that Armageddon fact and look at the actual reality of what's going on.
I agree with that. That's when you go back to systemic versus non-systemic, right? When people talk about, right?
That's right.
People talk about diversification.
We did discuss that briefly.
And that's something that people think, well, if I diversify, I'm going to eliminate risk. No, not really. Not really, you're not, right? You have to know the difference between systemic and non-systemic risk. So how do listeners balance Fed news in their long-term plan?
If I listen to the news and I'm self-realizing, because I've read the first chapters of Dr. Wallace's book, that I have anxiety about watching the news, my first small piece of advice is limit your news exposure. It'll help you have a little bit more clarity about yourself, hopefully. The other piece that I think is very powerful, and we all need this, myself included, is hire an accountability partner, somebody to talk with about what concerns you have about our environment. And it can be a financial advisor. I'd like to say some of my clients lean on me. I'm sure they lean on you for that at times. But it can be a spouse, it can be a neighbor, it can be a brother, just somebody to keep you in check. And often us talking through that really helps relieve some stress. The easy one is focus on the controllables, which is so true. Yes, it's a cliche answer, but there are a lot of things we can't control in this world, and we have to be at peace with that. But there are much more things we can control that we don't really realize in the moment that we can take advantage of. And so the analogy I always use is, imagine driving your car from Chicago to California, right? I want to map it out. I have all this game plan, and then it starts raining. Does that mean I'm going to get out of my car and ride my bike the rest of the way? No. Does that mean I'm going to walk? Absolutely not. I know the car's going to get me there faster. I just might need to drive a little slower. I just might need to tweak some things. We're not getting off the road. We're just adjusting based on the conditions around us. And that's the way people win. And I've seen it time and time and time again. A couple nuggets for those that are thinking through what to do and how to go about it. Sometimes the answer is nothing, and sometimes it's just minor changes.
Absolutely. I like the analogy about driving from Chicago to California. In the old days, you would use the old Thomas guide, if you know what the Thomas guide map is. Now you just have the GPS, right? Which is important now. That's why you plug it into the GPS, and it's going to give you your alternative routes, whether I use Waze. The Waze can take you to some roads, sometimes like kind of sketchy. And I don't want to do that one, or you can use Google Maps, whatnot. But it is important to use some sort of GPS. I like the analogy of having an accountability partner. That is important. Someone that you do trust, which is critical. Someone that you do trust, someone that you do value their opinion. We're not talking about social media. We're not talking about TikTok or Instagram. We're talking about someone that you can sit down, pick up the phone, have a conversation with, Zoom call, Teams, whatever you use. It's so important to have an accountability partner. But again, to make sure that you understand their financial genetic code.
No projection here,
exactly.
Right?
Making sure that they are in alignment with who you are. Future Wealth Builders, thanks for joining this afternoon. I'm here with James Alexander, partner at Edge Financial. This is his third time on the show. We started off in 2025, came back in the second quarter, and we're going to end the quarter as well in quarter number 4. If you haven't already picked up my book, Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge, please make sure you pick that up. It's in the description. It is an Amazon bestseller. So, Mr. Alexander, what financial literacy steps should families take before the year closes? Now we are in the fourth quarter, which is so important.
Yes, fourth quarter, which means the calendar year is quickly approaching us. And most of us, we think about the holiday season. And that's what we get excited about, and we plan for that. But there are some financial tips that people can do, depending on their situation, of course, but they can take action now, and that will benefit them tremendously in the future. One of them is look at your tax situation. What do I mean by that? How much income did you make? What appropriate tax would that look like? Are there any additional write-offs you can do by contributing to an IRA and getting some money back? Or did I, put in my Roth IRA? Now, you don't have to do it before the end of the calendar year. You can do it before tax day. But really understanding your income, which is probably going to be a little bit more clearer now because we're towards the end of the year, to start planning for how to take advantage of the money that I have. There is such a thing, and I won't go in great detail about it, but so many of us miss out on this that don't have an advisor that does for them. It's this very fancy financial term called tax loss harvesting. And that is a way to sell something solely for the purpose of a tax loss and rebuying something similar. It is legal. You can do it. Look at your investments, see what might have unrealized losses on paper. We can talk about that at a later date, but just look it up. This is something, yes, you can Google, and it should spit out the right answer on how to go about doing that. Another piece is, if you have a traditional IRA and you're retired and you're in a low income bracket, consider moving some of that money to a Roth IRA for tax-free environment later in life. Yes, you pay taxes now, but if you run some math on that, it can be pretty powerful having money in a tax-free bucket. Imagine taking income out and not having to pay income tax on it. Pretty neat. Those are some practical tips. Probably the last piece, this is more mindset. You talk a lot about budgeting in the book, which I love, and how it's so important. Self-check yourself on that. It's been a year now. I had a budget if I did one in January. How did it go? Give yourself some grace, but at the same time, hold yourself accountable. You and your spouse, if you're married, did I overspend in this category? Why did I overspend? What do we want to do better next year, right? It's like building a muscle. You want to keep that muscle going stronger and stronger. In order to do that, you got to assess where you're at. So those are a couple things that people can do before year end.
I want to go back to the traditional IRA versus the Roth IRA. And you mentioned this fancy, little known, I guess some people don't really take advantage of the opportunity of the converting that from traditional to a Roth. Could you kind of delve in that a little bit more for the listeners that are out there?
You bet. So most of us, if we're approaching retirement, we're later on in the stage of life. You can still do some Roth conversions early on. It might make sense, but I'm going to start with the example of I'm in my 50s, let's say, or even my 60s. And I built up a phenomenal bucket of money in my 401k. Often that money is tax deferred money. What does that mean? That means I wanted to do it because, yes, I wanted to save, but I also got a tax break every year I contributed. I contributed $20,000 that year. I can write off $20,000 of my income. What that does, though, is if I do that every single year, that can build this traditional IRA to be a big pot of money. It could be $500,000, $1 million, more than that even, over time. And the problem with that, these are happy problems, mind you, but the problem with that is now when I take that money out of my traditional IRA, all of it becomes taxed. And furthermore, if I don't touch it, by the time I'm 73, the government's going to force me to take money out and tax me whether I wanted to or not. So let's talk about focusing on the controllables. Let's look at, okay, I'm 60 years old. My income is lower because I'm working part-time. So I might be in a lower tax bracket than I was years ago. What that allows me to do is, okay, we run some math. I'll convert $50,000 as an example from that 401k or traditional IRA, and I move it into a Roth IRA. The downside of doing that is, yes, you are taxed on that $50,000. But if we're in a lower tax bracket, I might not have to pay as much tax than I would have had to much later in life. And so we want to bake in all these math equations, time value money, all these aspects. But here's the key. Now that $50,000 is in my Roth IRA, growing tax-free for the rest of my life. And so I have more flexibility. If tax rates go up, I have a bucket I can touch that I don't have to pay taxes. So I don't have to pay Uncle Sam more than I have to. If I don't ever use that money, I can gift it. Talk about that generational wealth. I smile when clients inherit Roth IRAs because that is tax-free. And yes, you have to take it out within 10 years after you inherit it, but you can wait 9 years and 364 days, take it all out, let all that grow, and you're not taxed on it. So long-winded answer to your question, but that's the gist of this Roth conversion strategy. You want to look at it every single year depending on your taxes.
Absolutely. I used it a lot with my clients. So for the listener, how many times can you do the conversion per year?
As many times as you want. As of right now, they tried to limit the cap on how much you can convert. They did not succeed in that. So you can convert as much or as little and as many times as you want. The key is the year you convert it is the year it's taxed. So you want to be careful on how much you do and make sure that it's the right amount.
And one final question for our listeners out there. Once you convert, let's say hypothetically that you convert all of your money to a Roth IRA, are you then removed from the RMDs that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, you are. If everything is out of the traditional IRA, you no longer have a required minimum distribution. It's a powerful thing.
Bingo. Kind of led you into that for our listeners out there itself. But that's so important because those RMDs, you may not want to take those RMDs, but you're required to do so and you're taxed. The government says basically, hey, listen, we want our money that was tax deferred grow. Well, here's a strategy that you can use that can eliminate the RMDs and allow you to have tax-free money. And also when you're in a Roth, then it doesn't count as income for your Part B of your Medicare or Medicaid.
There's so many ripple effects. Exactly right. We actually ended up, I'll give you a quick short story of a client just to highlight how powerful this is. Client had a traditional and a Roth. They did a good job of balancing the two. They have a drug that they need for a certain condition that I won't share on this episode, but it's a very special drug. And it costs a lot of money, about $2,000 a month for this drug. The only way it will be for quote unquote free is if they have no income. So we created an environment that they have no taxable income by taking money out of their Roth IRA, and it saved them $24,000 that drug cost. So there's lots of ripple effects by creating a flexible tax environment.
Future Wealth Builders, you're getting new information, right? Because this is why you meet with someone such as James. It's so important because now you have, what do I always say? Generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. The knowledge is so important to transfer the wealth. As you mentioned earlier, yes, if it is transferred to your inheritance or your beneficiaries, they have the 10-year rule, but they don't have to take it out every year. They can wait to the year 9 and 364 days, as you mentioned earlier. Also, we're speaking about how you can eliminate the RMDs. Well, one way to do that is convert it over to a Roth. And again, you don't have to do it once per year. You can do it as many times you want. You are taxed that year on the conversion rate. But the key is if you are in a lower tax bracket, it may not be as impactful versus if you're in a higher tax bracket. That's some great stuff, James. So what steps can listeners take now to protect better and pass on their wealth? I know we kind of touched upon it, but I know some other strategies as well.
I probably won't go into great detail other than the major takeaway. I know you've hit home plenty in the book. I'll reiterate, get an estate plan. It's so important. It puts, again, that controllable back in your shoes of what do I want people to use this money for? If you want to have certain rules around that, or, making sure everything's accounted for with all accounts. Otherwise, your state gets control of it and decides, and nobody wants that. So wills and trusts and all these other things, really look at it. I know it's not fun. I know firsthand from the clients I work with, it's like pulling teeth to get them to do it. But I'll tell you what, once it's done and both parties feel good about it, both spouses, there is such a sigh of relief of, oh my gosh, I now can relax and just focus on that end game for it. So that's one piece. Another piece to better pass on wealth more than protect wealth, but there is a protective piece here, is if you have enough and your financial well-being is set, meaning stage 5 is good, consider gifting to your children or those loved ones earlier than just when you're no longer here on earth and saying that you receive an inheritance. If you trust your child to use this money wisely and all that, the impact to them in their 20s is substantially larger than the impact when they're in their 50s or 60s, which is often when people inherit money. And so a little bit goes a long way. And again, everyone's different with how they view that, but that's something to just think about. And then the other piece probably is just, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but talk about protecting your wealth. The number one reason people go broke in today's world, I just read this, I think from Michael Kitces, is the long-term care piece, health concerns later in life that just exhausts all the money because it's so expensive. If you're in your 50s and 60s, especially, plan ahead for that. In fact, it's a lot less expensive to insure yourselves on long-term care at that stage of the game than when you're in your 70s, just because of the cost of insurance. And so it's not just the math, but it's the feeling of, okay, if I do need care when I'm 88 years old, I'm covered. So I can enjoy my money when I'm in my 60s and 70s and 80s how I want to, and not have to worry about this potential problem. So a couple things there to help.
That's a great segue, because when you talk about long-term care, it's one of those topics that people do not like to talk about. And it's a variety of ways. You can get a traditional long-term care. You can get a hybrid plan with insurances. You can get annuities. In certain states, they have long-term care with annuities as well. But most importantly, what you mentioned is that not everyone has budgets out between $90 to $100,000 in terms of long-term care. That's something you don't really think about. And we know in California, it's $7,000 per month to be in a facility. That's in a single room facility. So we know that that's around what, 98,000 to 100,000 that you're looking at per year. And if you're in such a facility for 2 to 3 years, that's $300,000. And if you have $500,000 or $1 million, you're talking about $700,000 remaining at that point that you're transferring over. But I want to tap into something I think a lot of people don't really understand, if you don't mind, in terms of taxes. The difference between receiving a gift and receiving an inheritance. Could you kind of tap into the difference between the two? If someone is being gifted stock or a home and versus inherited, what's the difference between the two?
Great question. Yes, no, that's a powerful one. So a gift, there are rules on gifts. There's only so much you can give before it counts against your inheritance later. However, I'm going to use the typical client example to make the point on the difference. If I'm a married couple and I want to gift to my children because I feel they need it and it's going to best impact them, the gifting rules is $19,000 per individual per donee. What does that mean? I can give $19,000. My spouse can give $19,000 to one person. I can total give up to $38,000. As long as that I gift less than that, it can be stock, it can be cash, a variety of things. As long as the value of it is under 38 grand, there's no tax at all. You don't have to report it. You don't have to do much with it. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's a gift. Compare that with an inheritance. When you provide an inheritance, there are guardrails you have to pass. The state might want to get taxes on that. The IRS, federal government, might want to get taxes on that before your children can inherit it. Now, these thresholds are pretty high, but at the same time, those thresholds could change in the future. And so do we want to make an impact now with no problems whatsoever? Or do we want to take the chance that the government in some way, shape, or form, or the state grabs their hands on it before I inherit it? And I think that piece is very important to consider when you're determining whether to give now or give later.
And so let's take it a step further, if we can. Let's say hypothetically, let's use stock as an example. If I gift someone some stock, let's say I gifted you stock and you decide to sell that stock, what's the tax implications with that?
If you gift it to me now and I sell it, I pay most likely capital gains tax, which is 15%. Unless I'm in a higher income, I'm most likely paying 15% tax, and that's it. If I inherit that stock, I get what's called a step up in cost basis, where I probably won't pay any tax on that. But again, we're talking about time value of money and all these other variables. So there's a good chance when I sell that stock, I only pay 15% if I'm getting it now, versus the parent who might be in a higher income bracket will pay 20 or 23.8%. So there's even a smaller piece there. The only time you get a step up in cost basis is all the money that you never sold stock in and you passed away. And so we can't always bank on that because, again, these are rules today. They're not guaranteed to be rules tomorrow. And so what can we control now that we feel good about? That's where we go back to focus on the controllables.
Love it. Love it. This has been a great conversation. So a couple of final questions for you, Mr. Alexander. Again, thank you for hopping into the studio. Outstanding job again. We're going to have you again next year. Man, could you imagine? 2026 last year,
No,
2025, you started off the year, you're ending the year 2025. We're going to bring you back at the start of 2026 because we have to start the year off right. Give me a couple of final takeaways that you want the listeners to kind of gather from this conversation.
First and foremost, if you have fears about your own money and you feel lost, take a step back. Know you're not alone. I talked about that a little bit before. There's a lot of people that have concerns. I work with people, wide walks of life, people that have substantial wealth that are still worried. And so that's a major takeaway to me is relax about it. Yes, we need to address it. That's number one. Number two is with concerns that you might have, what do I need to do to put myself in a better position financially? So we talked about some tactics on this episode, but you laid out something in the book that we didn't talk about yet on this episode around, I just call it laying your cards out. List out all your debts, list out your budget, list out what you're striving to do and game plan for that. And I want to add something in there that I know you highlighted, but I wanted to emphasize. Don't beat yourself up over this stuff. Pace it out and celebrate those wins. And as long as, again, you have that good game plan, celebrate it, be happy about it, use that momentum to yourself going forward. And so you said something as a quote, I think, probably from you or perhaps a client you were mentioning, having a budget is planning for your future freedom. I think that is so powerful because none of us like doing budgets, but if we rewire it that way, I'm not just doing a budget, I'm planning my future freedom. That's a different narrative. So those are the takeaways I want those listening to get through.
Appreciate that. So now I have several of my listeners say, hey, I want to talk to James. I want to get on his calendar. How would they do so? How would someone get in contact with you?
Oh, I appreciate the question. So our website is edgefa.com. You can look me up right there. I'm on the first page within the partnership component. You can also listen to the podcast that we do. We're calling it the Edge Effect moving forward. It was formerly named the Ed's Edge. We're calling it the Edge Effect now and making personal finance personal. And so certainly you can find that podcast online too. All my contact information's right there.
Yeah, you're rebranding. James, what an insightful and timely episode. I want to thank you not only for sharing your expertise as a certified financial planner, but also for connecting the technical side of planning with the human side, the inherited financial behaviors, the financial healing, and the intentional steps it takes to build something lasting. To our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to pick up my book, Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge. It's more than a guide. It's a blueprint for transforming financial survival into generational prosperity. And to James Alexander, CFP, on behalf of myself, our producer, Ray Haycraft, and the entire New Wealth Wave community, thank you for setting the tone for this quarter and showing us how planning and purpose go hand in hand. And as we always say here on the New Wealth Wave podcast, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. I'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the New Wealth Wave podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Our show is edited and produced by Ray Haycraft. To dive deeper into the world of financial wisdom and learn how to create your financial footprints, head to our website at www.drjwallace.com. For more updates and exclusive content, connect with us on social media by searching Dr. Joaquin Wallace. And if you have questions and comments, feel free to email us at thenewwealthwavepodcast@gmail.com. Remember, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And as always, thanks for listening. The content presented in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes and should not be taken as investment advice. The views and opinions expressed by our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the New Wealth Wave podcast and its host or producers. Listeners are urged to exercise discretion and judgment before making any financial or investment decisions. Always consult with a financial professional or advisor before taking any action based on the content of this podcast. If you're enjoying the New Wealth Wave podcast, we appreciate if you leave us a review. We're always open to topic suggestions and guest recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us directly with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the New Wealth Wave podcast.